All right, welcome back to Teacher's Tech Bar. Today we're going to start in on our Google Sheets video series. This one we're going to strictly talk about just organizing and getting set up and talk about some of the basic vocabulary. So to take you back to the gradebook, just remind you this is not a video about setting up a gradebook. It's simply using a gradebook that I've set up myself to show you some of these basic tricks. And this can be applied to really anything you do on Google Sheets. So at the end of this series, we're going to get to something that looks like this. And even as you can see, well, one trick we'll look at first is to how to zoom out. We'll go up to zoom and we'll make it 50% so I can see more of it. So what you see here is the students' names. We're going to put these two columns. They're going to stay where they are. We're going to freeze them. And then we're going to start to put all the different assignments along there. So if we scroll over, we can keep their grade and the points they earned where they are, but we can move the rest of the sheet around. You see there's some calculations down here, and we also have this section is going to be used for individual assessments. So we're going to say like this is the student and how many points they lost on each of the pages, and then it will automatically calculate all the grades and put it into a quick little visualization to see what the distribution of scores looks like on that particular assessment. All right, so let's dive right into these basics. So here we have a blank spreadsheet, and the goal is by the end to make it look just like what we had on that previous page. So before we get going, I just want to make sure we're all on the same page when it comes to vocabulary. So these letters denote columns, okay? That's how I'm going to refer to them. I'm going to say this particular column, and the numbers refer to the rows, and then when you look inside, you're going to see individual cells. All right, so I want to make sure that I have the student's name in this first cell. So we're going to go name, their points, their grade, and we're going to put in the names. And I'm just going to go back for simplicity's sake, and I'm going to highlight, and I'm going to press Command C. That's going to allow me to copy this, and I'm going to paste it over here, and paste is Command V. Just makes it a lot more fluid if you're using the keyboard shortcuts as opposed to, going up to edit, copy, cut, paste, all that stuff. It just makes it a little bit quicker. So I remember when I first started in a finance department at what was then called the Corporate Executive Board, I thought I was really confident with Excel, and I produced something that my boss was going to eventually give to the CFO, and he just totally tore it apart. And there's a lot of little details that he helped me with, and I think are actually pretty standard in when you're using this, that just make everything clear and clean. And I think this is a good part of focusing on the communication and how clear you can make things. And there's some things you can do that just make your sheet easier to read both for you and for others very quickly. Top sections are going to be sort of the headers. Let's make those bold. So we'll click, hold, and drag. Click, hold, and drag, and then just make them bold. I also, in these headers, like to make them center aligned. So again, while it's all highlighted, we're going to go over to the center align and make sure that that's clicked. Now, this is not what your cell would look like originally. It might look something like this. And you can see that Halapulavaitai, his name does not fit in this cell. So if I were to type in the points over here, 6, you would see that they don't show up. In order to avoid that, you can hover your cursor over so it looks like that, where you have that right-facing arrow, and just double-click. And then it will automatically make it to fit the longest entry that you have in the cell along that whole column. So that is our beginning stage. So as you can see, these silver lines are what we call freezing, allow you to freeze cells. And what that means is as I scroll over, the important stuff stays in the same spot. But if let's say that, I put enough assignments that actually went off the page and I wanted to see what was over in this one, I could scroll it all the way over to see how it's lined up with those particular students and then what their grades are. And I also, if I have more assessments down there, I can scroll down while keeping all the grade information in the same spot. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to put these freeze locations in. But actually, before we do that, I'm going to put in these descriptive statistics here and just the naming of them. We'll talk about how to make these calculations in future videos, but for now, let's just put the naming. And I like to highlight them in a different color just because I know that that's something different within there. So let's go ahead and say, and now what I'm going to show you is if you don't want to just do that double click, you can also change by clicking and holding and dragging over to the right. Okay, so that one I just dragged. I could have done the double click I showed you before. Now you saw in this one, I highlighted this whole section in blue. So I'm going to click on the 13, hold the mouse down until I get to 15, and it highlights all the way forever going out in those respective rows. And then I'll go up here to the paint bucket and I'll fill it with a nice light blue so I can still see the cells. And then the other thing I'm going to do is highlight these again and bold that up because those are going to be some summary. And actually, I want the whole thing bolded. There we go. And what did I want to do? I wanted to bold that whole section. So now when I go to type something in there in the future, it's automatically going to be bolded. Okay, and then what we had is this section here, which was the assessment. And let me just zoom this out a little bit so we can see it. So this is assessment 1, the student's name again, and then just to make sure I don't make a silly addition error when calculating a grade, I put in the page number and then the number of points they got off on that. That's how I do it. Again, this isn't a video about grading, but let's go ahead and Command C. We will paste that right here. And I also want to copy this section, Command C, and then I'll hit Command V. And you can see we have the numbers in bold, and then we're also going to make sure to put these things over there as well. And one thing I want to point out about these here, so you notice that this somehow these got bigger. If I didn't have that, let's just do something quickly. If you went to type that in, you'd see something like this. You can see I can't see everything in there. Score plus test corrections is too large, and percent plus test corrections is also too large. So there's a little trick called wrap text, and what that does is it allows you to keep the same width of the cell, but just make it a taller cell so everything fits. So for example, I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight these two cells, click and hold, and then I'm going to go up to this text wrapping, and I'm going to hit this little wrap button, and you can see that changes here. Another little sort of tic-tac little thing is you see how these are center aligned within the cell. So not only are they in the middle, but in terms of up and down, you can make that happen by clicking the cell, going up here and hitting this middle, and that'll bump it right to the middle. Again, I probably should do that for all of them just to make it look a little bit cleaner. And you never know when this might be used. Probably for a grade book, you don't need it, but if it's something you're trying to make for students that you want to make sure is particularly clean and clear, that's how you do it. All right, you don't need to put in the grid lines too much. I think the only place I have grid lines is on the bottom here. If we want to do that, again, let's highlight all these cells that we made blue, click and hold the numbers. That again goes out to infinity essentially on these. And then what we're going to do is hit this borders up here, and this gives you the option of how you want to border each respective cell. So I'm going to just click this one, you'll see what happens. And I'd encourage you to play around with the other ones to see what happens. It doesn't make sense for me to go through all of them on the video, but that's a sense for what happens when you click sort of the max number of lines that you can put in. All right, so let's freeze the frames now. So what you're going to do is you're going to click on this C here, and then you're going to go to View, Freeze, and then up to the current column. So what this is going to put in the vertical one. And you can see now that's, as we scroll over, we're all at S, T, U, V, W, etc. You can see that the other things have gone away, but we still see this portion of it. Now let's freeze it from the bottom up. So we'll click on 16 and we'll say View, Freeze, and we will freeze up to the current row. And now we have this cross with the silver lines, just as we do over here. All right, so this is some of the basics of getting set up, the vocabulary, how do you position things in a cell. When we put in the numbers, one thing I'm going to say is, if you have names, it's helpful to have them left aligned. When you start to put in numbers by themselves, these are eventually going to be formulas, but 1, 2, 3, it just doesn't look good if you have it left aligned. There's really no other way to say it. Probably is, but just to be sort of quick and efficient here, keep the numbers center aligned. But if you're on the far left column, it's easiest and cleanest to have the names left aligned. All right, but we'll talk more about that as we add in more features. And I'm actually, just before we go to the next video, I'm going to copy and paste this in over here. Boom. So now we're all set up. And what I'd encourage you to do as you're building this out yourself is to see what happens. I mean, I just copy and pasted that, so the formatting is going to stay the same. But, if I click this and undo some of the stuff that was there before, you can see that the wrap texting isn't there, so I can't see the names. All right, but I'm going to press Command Z to go back and undo what I did. That was Command Z. And yeah, so that's essentially the basics on how you move things around in a cell, how you create some freeze frames, highlight some text, highlight a whole row, highlight a whole column. Play around with it. That's where a lot of the learning comes from. Your teachers, that's the case. So I encourage you to sort of jump in and get started and try to figure out what works best for you. All right, look forward to seeing you in the second one, where we're going to start to make some calculations and utilize the functions that are built in so you don't have to do the math.